Long before axis deer became a familiar sight on Texas ranches, before their spotted coats glowed under game cam flash or their antlers filled the hill country skyline, they arrived quietly, almost as an experiment. It was the early 1930s, a time when Texas ranching was evolving beyond cattle alone. Wealthy landowners were beginning to explore the idea of exotic game ranching, inspired by European estates where deer, antelope, and wild sheep were managed, not just for meat, but for sport, beauty, and prestige. The axis deer, native to the forest and grasslands of India, caught their attention. In 1932, a small group of axis deer were imported into Texas and released on private land in the hill country, most notably at the Wyo Ranch, one of the most influential ranches in the state's wildlife history. At the time, no one knew whether they would survive. Texas summers were brutal, predators were abundant, and the deer were thousands of miles from the monsoon forest that they had evolved in. But the axis deer adapted quickly. They found the limestone hills familiar enough. They found nutrition through the grass, and the live oaks and cedar breaks provided shade and cover. Unlike native whitetail deer, axis deer breed year-round, giving them a reproductive advantage. Their fawns could be born in any season, allowing populations to recover rapidly from drought, predators, or hunting pressure. By the 1940s and 1950s, the experiment was no longer an experiment. Axis deer herds were thriving, spreading to neighborhood ranches through intentional releases and natural expansion. Ranchers noticed something else too. Axis deer were hardy, resistant to many parasites, and remained active during daylight hours longer than whitetail. Their meat was lean and mild, their antlers long, symmetrical, and elegant, which became highly prized. Still, they were never released on public land. Texas wildlife law kept the axis deer classified as exotic livestock, not native game. That single legal distinction would shape their future. With no closed season and no bag limits on private land, axis deer management fell entirely into the hands of landowners. By the late 20th century, axis deer were no longer rare. They had become a defining feature of the Texas hill country, seen crossing ranch roads at dusk, standing beneath pecan trees, or moving silently through river bottoms. Yet their story remains very unique. They are not native to Texas, but they are now woven into Texas history. Not wild in the traditional sense, but no longer truly foreign. They represent a moment when Texas chose to reshape its landscape, blending old world wildlife with new world land. And today, when you catch one on camera, spotted, hide glowing in the dark, antlers sweeping back, it's worth remembering that deer's ancestors crossed an ocean nearly a century ago, and against all odds they made Texas home. And that story of how axis deer became part of Texas carries forward in a way that I never expected, because decades later it led straight into 2020. When COVID hit and the world shut down, everything went quiet at once. Roads emptied, offices closed. Life slowed to a pace none of us were used to. And like a lot of people, the one place we could still go, without permission, without noise, was outside. At that point, I hadn't hunted in years, not since high school. It would be another 2 years before I picked it back up again in 2022. And that's a story for another day. But 2020 was still a remarkable year in the Texas hill country. We had rain, real rain. The kind that fills stock tanks, greens up the pastures, and makes oats take off like they're supposed to. Every time I drove past the ranch, I saw axis deer everywhere, massive herds, calm and unbothered. One day I stopped and counted them, 20 axis bucks in one field, just the bucks, not counting the does. They were out there feeding on oats that my grandfather had planted, with their heads down and their spots glowing in the sun. It didn't feel real. It felt like something you weren't supposed to see anymore. And my dad felt that too. While the rest of the world was glued to screens and headlines, he got the itch. He started putting in real time out there, long, hot summer days, working around the weather, moving slowly, paying attention. And axis don't follow seasons the way whitetail do, and that summer they were at their peak. That effort paid off. He harvested 2 trophy axis bucks that year, absolute monsters. Both weighed over 230 pounds, And these weren't delicate animals, they were heavy, thick-bodied, powerful deer, big enough that I had to come help retrieve them, big enough that we used the Bobcat skid steer just to lift them for processing. Those 2 deer fed us for the year and into the next. People who aren't from this part of Texas sometimes assume axis are small, like antelope or maybe a light framed whitetail, and they're not. Anyone who spent time around them knows better. That summer, nobody was really hunting. It was hot, it was humid, outside of traditional deer season as well. Everyone was focused on COVID, working from home and just trying to get through the day. And then my Uncle Ronnie drove down from Michigan. He stayed across the street, working in my grandfather's shop, and like me, like my dad, like my grandfather, he'd stop what he was doing and look out across that big field every day. Those axes would be there, grazing, moving slowly, completely unaware of what the rest of the world was dealing with. He saw the same thing we all did, the beauty of it, the calm of it, the way time seemed to pause. Now, my Uncle Ronnie isn't with us anymore. He passed not long after that summer, and when I think back on those days, the axis deer are woven into that memory completely. There was something surreal about it all. A zoo couldn't offer that experience. Sometimes I imagine that's what the first people here felt, standing on a hilltop, watching a herd of buffalo graze across the plains, that deep, quiet peace, the kind that settles in your chest and reminds you everything doesn't have to be complicated. That's what the Hill Country gave us in 2020. While the world was changing fast, maybe faster than it ever had, something simple stayed the same: land, family, food, wildlife moving through a field like it always had. And that memory stays with me, not because it was dramatic, not because it was loud, but because for a brief moment we had the land and we had each other, and it turned out that was all enough.